Good morning, BookTube. Today I want to talk about the first book that I finished off of my Remembrance Reads TBR, which is Disputed Earth, Geology and Trench Warfare on the Western Front, 1914 to 1918, by Peter Doyle. This is one of those books where you think, do I really need to read this? Is this going to tell me anything? A, is it going to be too academic and am I going to struggle to understand it? And B, do I really need to read it? And the answer to both those questions, well, the answer to question one is no, it is not too complicated, not too scientific, not too academic. And number two, it is a book worth reading. Now, I won this book in a competition, I don't know when, a few years ago. It's signed by Peter Doyle, and I haven't read it since I bought it. I think it's been sitting on my shelf saying, oh, I should read this, but when should I get around to it? And actually, now I've read it, I wish I'd read it a couple of years ago because it helps contextualise every other military history book I've ever read about World War One on the Western Front. I should first of all say it's a beautifully produced book by Unicorn Publishing. Keep getting it wrong. Unicorn Publishing. www.unicornpublishing.org if you want to know. It is a beautifully produced book. The cover has these French flaps with pictures of battlefields on the inside. By the way, I hate the phrase French flaps. It just sounds like it's a euphemism for something. But as I said, look, excellently produced, and the book, as well as being packed full of actual writing, is full of useful illustrations. Like, for example, this is that's a cross section of a Vimy Ridge from the geological point of view. There's some pictures, obviously, of the sites now. There are maps of towns. Like that's a map of part of the Flanders, I think, flooded to stop the German advance. And there are pictures of things then. So you've got, that's a mine crater, but also there's pictures of contemporary sort of archaeological sites. And from various manuals. I mean, it's a beautifully illustrated book, but the illustrations are and the illustrations are good. But the key thing is, what does it tell you? Well, it tells you how important geology was to how World War One on the Western Front panned out. It isn't obviously the only factor involved, but actually it's a more important factor than you think. Now, the book is divided into 6 chapters. Chapter 1 briefly sort of summarises is a sort of general introduction to geology and military war and the military. The second chapter is called Geology, Geologists and Warfare, which talks about how the two, like, geologists and armies came together, what they did. It sort of starts going with Walter Krantz, who is the sort of father of military geology and was in the German army. The thing you get from this book is that the German army seems, at least to start off with, being much better organised in terms of geology and incorporating geology within its armed forces than the Allies were. But the Allies got better and better as time went on, particularly in terms of identifying water sources, which we'll come on to later. Chapter 3 is geology of Flanders and northern France. Chapter 3 is probably the most geology of the chapters in this book, and it's probably the one that you'll have to, if you're not a geologist, you probably will have to take time to understand. It's pretty clearly explained, but you find yourself, there are technical terms, and you find yourself going, which one? What's Kemmel sands again? What's this? But it's actually very well explained, and it's the core on which the rest of the book is built, basically. You can refer back to it if you need to. There's an illustration on page page 43. 43. So bear with me, everybody. I sort of planned this and then I forgot to actually mark. Yeah, so there's a good map at the start here of the geology of the whole area. Which is a useful map to refer to. Although he constantly has other maps, more specialised maps, and yeah. So chapter 3, I'd say, is the most technical in terms of geology. Everything else is kind of the geology is weaved into the to discussions about other things. And then chapter 4 is geology and trench warfare, which is more about the practical consequences of the geology, how trench building was done in different areas, why different areas had an impact. There's a very good quote in there about, I mean, everybody in World War One talks about mud. The mud is the thing that we all talk about the most. And there's a quote. I'll read a bit later actually. Then chapter 5 is breaking the siege, artillery, mining, gas, and tanks, and that's taking on the sort of the 4 different ways they tried to break trench warfare, and how each failed fundamentally, and how geology affects all of those things. It affects the impact of artillery. It affects how you can protect yourself from artillery. It obviously affects mining, where you can dig the best and easiest. But it affects how gas, especially early phase, because the gravity has an impact on how gas chlorine ran. So if it would run downhill, so that it has an effect in gas. And obviously with tanks, the effect is more about what the ground you can maneuver on. If it's too waterlogged, too muddy, early tanks had a real problem getting across it. So geology has an impact there. And then the final chapter is military resources, water supply, and aggregates. Now this was the one which you think, where I found myself thinking, God, I'd never even really given that any consideration. Like water supply is key. And you find you never, it's one of those things you never even think about. It says, there's a quote on page 218 where it says, providing an adequate supply of potable water would therefore be a significant problem on the Western Front, with an estimate of the minimum requirement for massed troops being 150,000 gallons a day for every square mile of territory occupied. That's a lot of water, and there's a lot of discussion there about how geologists mapped the whole battlefield in terms of taking boreholes so they could identify where water could be collected. Because obviously, it's after a certain point, the surface water you cannot touch because it's polluted with chemicals, corpses, shit, piss. I mean, it's an undrinkable resource. So you have to dig to get good clean water. But it also affects the level of the water table, which is what these bores are. Also affects how deep you can dig shelters, whether you can mine through them and under them, and it also helps explain why the mud in some sectors was worse than in others. There is a quote about the mud. I mean, mud, as I said, is the thing that you think about most in World War One, and you find yourself seeing these pictures. I mean, we've already showed this. I mean, look, that picture there is quite a thing. Here we go. So I want to read this. This is the mud of the Somme battlefield was a very different quality from that remembered with each equal abhorrence in the Ypres sector. The mud on the Somme sucked like quicksand. It was sticky as treacle. It appeared to be bottomless. The familiar duck tracks, long wooden lathes covered in as is a bath mat of the northern sectors, was useless on the Somme. Stand anywhere between Les Bouffes and Rancourt, and the feet will rest on soil into which men sank waist, even breast deep, beneath the surface of oozing mud. Trenches were waterlogged. A pitiless rain descended, and that's a quote from. I'm just going to read this. I am very disorganised with these things, but I kind of think it makes it more human. From Lieutenant Colonel Graham Seaton Hutchinson, from 1933, a book called Pilgrimage. I will say that he's very good at finding apposite quotes to back up his the general sort of the general discussion of his work. It has a superb uh, references and footnotes, endnotes, rather footnotes. Sorry, um, and so if you want to check things or you want to read more about certain things, you can. Um, so I've talked about how the book is structured. What do I think of the book? I really enjoyed it. I think it's well worth reading. It might seem like one of those. It might seem to. I mean, obviously, I think if your interest in World War One is not that deep, then it's probably not something you'd want to read. But I think if you're interested in World War One, having reading this as a foundational text, for want of a better word, would be very useful to you. I think it's going to be a book that I will actually refer to over and over again, like almost like as a reference book as much as anything else. Um, but it is a readable book. That was a concern that I had before I started. Very readable, in fact. It isn't overly academic. There are sections where you find yourself having to kind of think, "Oh, actually, did I really understand that?" and maybe go back and read it. But there's not much of that, and it's only because there's the and that's only mostly in chapter 3 when you get the most geology. Um, so yeah, I really do recommend this. It's a really fascinating book. I'm really glad I read it. I wish I'd read it when I got it, which was probably 2018, 2019. Um, so yeah, first book review of the TBR, and a positive. I've given it 4 stars on Goodreads. I should, which feels almost like a damning with faint praise. But so yeah, I would say 4 star, 4 5 star read. Well and worthily recommended. Thank you, and have a good day.